again, it just tells the story of it's the evil and the ugliness of people's hearts these days is everywhere.
This is Franky Rose's Think Tank. Here's your host, Franky Rose.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Think Tank. What a day. Oh my word. This is the 4th live today. And then I had some kind of cluster thing that I did in the middle of it all. So we're back. We're going to finish up with Ethan Crumbley's part 8 of his Miller hearing. So I'm going to pull that up. I think I was best over here and there. Let's get into this. It's been quite the hectic day. Audrey Cunningham is still missing. We got a little bit of an update on the 3 public servants that passed away yesterday morning. It's been a busy day. So back to Ethan Crumbley.
Up several serious misconducts that could change his security risk classification also.
Now, you've mentioned you've participated before in reviews of sentences of people who were previously sentenced of life without parole. In those cases, have some of them been resentenced to life without parole?
Yes, they have.
And in some of those cases, have they been sentenced to a term of years?
Yes, they have. As a matter of fact, the 2 were both terms of years.
And based on your experiences as a warden, deputy warden, and in being a witness, have you done any research about the recidivism rates for people released after initially being sentenced to life without parole?
Yes, Montclair College did a study on juvenile lifers that were released, and this was done in Pennsylvania. There are 3 states that have the highest amount of juvenile lifer offenders, and that's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Louisiana. So they did a study looking at the rate of recidivism, and they found that only 4% of the offenders released under the Miller decision were rearrested. Out of that 4%, only 2% had committed a new offense. In Michigan, there are no statistics run per se, but the department does keep record. And up to this point, there's roughly close to 200 different offenders that have been released that were juvenile offenders that have been released onto parole. And out of those 200 offenders, during the time since the Miller decisions come down, only 1 has been charged with a new crime, which is less than 1%.
Now, could you explain if Ethan were to get a term of years, the minimum is supposed to be between 25 and 40 under the law. What does that mean?
Well, 25 is the minimum sentence and 40 would be the max. If that were the way it's done. Now, if we're talking about strictly a minimum, then 25, anywhere from 25 to 40 would be the minimum term. So I'm not sure what reference this is being used.
And the maximum penalty under the statute is 60 years, correct?
Okay. All right.
So the 25 to 40 would be the minimum on the minimum end of a sentence, and the 60 would be the maximum, correct?
Yes.
So in a case like this, the judge has the opportunity to sentence somebody to, say, for example, 40 to 60 years, correct?
Correct.
Or 30 to 60 years.
Yes.
Or 25 to 60 years.
Yes, all those are possibilities.
But the absolute minimum would be the 25, correct?
If that's the range, it's there, yes.
Now, are you familiar with how felony firearm charges are treated?
Generally, felony firearms a flat 2-year term.
And that would be in addition to whatever other sentence was imposed for other offenses?
I believe it would be a consecutive sentence, but I'm not positive.
So consecutive, you would mean like 2 plus something, correct? Now, as you're calculating time in the Michigan Department of Corrections, is the minimum sentence what we refer to as calendar days?
Basically, the minimum term an offender receives is going to be what you see is what you get. If he got a 25-year term or a 40-year term minimum, he's going to serve 40 years on that minimum. There's no longer any good time. The department did away with that back in 1987. Then they converted to disciplinary credits, in which the parole board had the authority to grant basically good time. And they did away with that about 15 years after that. So there is no reduction in the sentence. The only reduction would be that of the jail credits that he would receive.
And that means jail credits, that he's getting credit on a future sentence for time he's serving now in jail, correct?
It would be, yes. In this case, this would be that future sentence.
So if he's been in jail 1 year, he would get 1 year credit, correct?
Correct.
And that would go, if you know, if you're not, let me know, to the felony firearm counts, correct?
That I do not know.
Okay. Now, if he were to be sentenced to, for example, 30 years to 60 years, when he hits the 30-year mark, what happens?
Well, really, it doesn't mean he gets out, walks out the door. That just means he's served the minimum amount he needs to serve in prison. So the parole board would then get what they call the PBJ, the parole board jurisdiction. They would review his case and determine whether or not they wanted to, in fact, consider him for parole.
And how many people make up the parole board, do you know?
Usually it's 10 members together. A majority has to be in favor of any decision, major decision.
And what sorts of things does the parole board look at in determining whether to grant parole?
First and foremost is danger to the community if released, danger and risk to the public.
Is there, I guess, sort of a scoring sheet where they figured that risk out?
There is. Can I say if I've seen one or know exactly what's in it? No, I can't. But yes, they do use a scoring sheet, and they do look at other factors. When I say risk, they're going to also look at his involvement in prison programs, his misconducts, the crime. All these factors are looked at.
Would it be fair to say that someone who doesn't behave themselves or participate in programs is less likely to get out at their minimum sentence?
Yes, that is very correct.
Now, are you familiar with the term flop?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
Flop means that a person was not given a parole and they'll be considered at some other date. Essentially, they are in the days when we had good time, it had a different connotation, but it's still the same thing. It means they're going to do additional time. The board may review it in another 5 years, but it's actually at the board's discretion whether or not they actually want to interview them at that time.
And before they're paroled, they have to go through the interview process as well as this review of what they've been doing while they've been in the Department of Corrections, correct?
Right. A parole eligibility report is prepared, and that looks at his entire adjustment while he's been in prison, including the misconducts. And just as a note on the misconducts, even though you can't take away from that minimum, you can add to that minimum if you get a major misconduct. So any major misconduct, and it's usually on a scale as to how many days will be added onto his sentence. But if he gets enough major misconducts, conceivably, he could be up to his minimum term, although that's, I think, pretty rare to see.
Now, if he were to be sentenced to a term of years, the maximum being 60, could he be kept until the 60-year mark?
Certainly.
So he doesn't have to be granted parole, correct?
No, and there are a number of offenders that never do see that parole.
And is it the parole board that decides how long they're going to flop a person for?
Well, they will decide when they will review the person again, yes.
Now, I think we talked about this before. He will be kept at the Thumb Correctional Facility until he's at least 18, correct?
Correct.
Then it would be up to the Department of Corrections to determine whether he stays there until he's about 26, 27.
Well, that would just be in the HYTA program that he would be able to stay in that unit. He would not be actually a participant in HYTA. He'd just be in with those offenders.
And it's up to the Department of Corrections then where and what facility he gets moved to and how frequently, correct?
That is correct. Usually the classification committee at the institution would make a recommendation, and generally they go along with that.
Now, one of the goals of the Department of Correction is habilitation or rehabilitation, correct?
Yes, definitely. That is why it's called corrections.
And based on the information you've reviewed as it relates to Mr. Crumbly, have you formed an opinion about his potential to be rehabilitated?
I have, but keep in mind I've had very limited information, basically with his records in jail. But honestly, I think everybody has that potential to change. And I think Mr. Crumbly would be no exception to that rule. But I think he has to make that choice.
So really, this is packed with information. I mean, it's explaining what his potential could be and could not be. And I think basically what they're saying in a lot of these different things that we've been learning over the last few days is he was smarter than the average kid. And he had plenty of time to sit there and educate himself. Video games, researching stuff, but then it turned sideways, didn't it? And I guess this is why the parents are now in the Hooskow.
He has to be the one to say, I'm willing to change.
And he would go about doing that by participating in those programs, the employment, the education possibilities that are available to him, correct?
Correct.
And if he were to decide he didn't want to participate or be rehabilitated, he would be treated by the Department of Corrections accordingly, right?
A person that probably sits by idly, not involved in anything, is not going to get a very positive evaluation.
Now, if Ethan were sentenced to life without parole, how would the programming be different for him than if he were sentenced to a number of years?
The programming wouldn't change either way.
Would he still qualify for all of the programs, Thumb or any other facility he has available?
He would, all dependent upon the level of security. Now, the Thumb only has level 2. Now, he would probably stay waved down. That means he's moved down to a level 2 to remain at the Thumb. But if he were to go to another facility, they might consider he would likely be a level 4, at least until he has that first 5 years in with the department before he could be reduced down to a level 2. So he wouldn't automatically qualify to go to any institution that has programs that he's interested in or that they think he should have. That security level is going to be the overriding factor. But in most cases, the programs are pretty universal throughout the department, although some institutions only offer certain programs, such as the Thumb has building trades, construction trades, etc.
And do these programs tend to have a list of people wanting to participate in them?
They generally do, yes.
And what sort of priority would somebody on a life without parole have on those lists?
Somebody doing life without parole would be able to get into building trades. Where it's going to be more difficult is to get into some of the required programming offered by the PSUs, such as assault offender programming. That he's going to be put on the back of the list because there are other offenders that are waiting to get out of prison that are close to their parole eligibility date. And those offenders are going to get priority. And it's understandable why the department does that. They want to make sure these programs are going to be released. The prisoners released do have that programming in advance.
When you use the term PSU, what do you mean by that?
Psych Services Unit.
Thank
And would his priority, would he keep getting bumped by people who come into the facility that may have a release date?
Oh, yes. Yeah, if they have a ERD coming up before his, and again, depending upon his sentence, it's hard to say what that would be. But if theirs is prior to his, he's going to get bumped. And if he's, as you indicated, if he's doing life without parole, he will likely not see that for a long time, if at all.
And ERD, which you just referred to, is earliest release date?
That is correct.
I have no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. People Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Romanowski.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Romanowski, I think this came out late in your testimony. You believe in rehabilitation, right?
Yes, I do.
And you really believe in it for everybody.
I believe that everybody has that potential.
Okay. Have you ever met an inmate or a defendant who, after 2 years of incarceration or a little less, like this defendant, that you would say could never be rehabilitated?
No, I've got to admit I have not.
Okay. In other words, for anyone in this defendant's position, you would offer the same testimony you offered today about the programs that are available, about the possibility of someone participating in those programs and getting rehabilitated.
Yes.
Dr. Romanowski, you mentioned previous cases you worked on are Miller cases where someone has already been sentenced. In many cases, they had lengthy prison terms already under their belt, right?
Yes, they had served lengthy periods of time.
They might have 30 or 40 years.
There are some cases where they have had up to that amount of time. Some had less, some had 15, some had 20, some had 25.
And you'll see some who are past that age of 26 when you say the...
Most of them are past that age.
Okay. And so you don't have that in this case.
No, we don't.
Okay. So you can't say where this defendant's going to be in 20 years.
No, and it's where this is a bit different from the other Miller hearings that have come down.
Would you agree with me that some defendants are more likely to be rehabilitated than others?
I believe that some are going to be a lot harder to rehabilitate.
Doctor, you mentioned on page 5 of your report that you reviewed some emails retrieved from the defendant's parents. What are you referring to?
Well, I don't think I saw the emails referred from his parents. And actually, the emails that I found in his file were from his grandparents and his aunt.
Okay, thank you. So those are jail messages, not things relating to prior to the crime.
Correct.
Okay. One of the things you did mention is the importance of maintaining family ties, correct?
Importance of family ties?
Yes.
Yes, as long as it's a positive family tie.
Okay, so that's important in rehabilitation. You agree?
I agree that if you have a good family, or if you've got a supportive family, and it's going to be benefit to you to maintain those ties, you should. But if, on the other hand, if the family has not been a good family, I did not think that would be a good recommendation.
So, Doctor, are you familiar with this defendant's parents' actions after his arrest?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and are you familiar with the text message his mother sent to a friend? And I'm going to read it to you and you can tell me if you're aware of this. The best lawyer in the world isn't going to get the defendant out of prison. So right now we're taking care of ourselves.
Yes, I believe I read that. And where I read it, though, was actually in the news.
Okay. And are you aware that his parents drained his bank account?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. And so when you talk about the defendant paying for his GED, you're not indicating that he came up with that money. In fact, he came in with $0 because his parents had taken all his money.
Right.
You see, how sad is this? We didn't hear about this stuff. We did, but we didn't have it put into any kind of perspective. And this certainly does. I mean, I'm going to actually go back a little bit for you guys.
If, on the other hand, if the family has not been a good family, I did not think that would be a good recommendation.
So, Doctor, are you familiar with this defendant's parents' actions after his arrest?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And are you familiar with the text message his mother sent to a friend? And I'm going to read it to you and you can tell me if you're aware of this. The best lawyer in the world isn't going to get the defendant out of prison. So right now we're taking care of ourselves.
Yes, I believe I read that. And where I read it, though, was actually in the news.
Okay. And are you aware that his parents drained his bank account?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. And so when you talk about the defendant paying for his GED, you're not indicating that he came up with that money. In fact, he came in with $0
Wow.
because his parents had taken all his money.
Right. I believe his relatives put the money in his account, other relatives other than his parents.
Doctor, did you watch the hearing yesterday?
No, I did not.
Okay, and did you watch the hearing this morning?
Only news clips.
Okay, so you didn't hear the victims who were in the school testify.
No, I didn't, but I know it's horrific.
You've never seen the video of the school shooting.
No, I have not.
You're not familiar with this defendant's history of obsession with extreme violence, about spending a lot of time on websites they aggregate videos of people being beheaded and cats being boiled alive.
No, I'm not aware. I did hear that on the news.
You've not reviewed the video of this defendant torturing a baby bird.
No.
Or about his writings about that and how he enjoyed that.
No.
About his desire to kill and torture, particularly to kill and torture younger victims, not just baby birds, but as he said, little kids.
I've heard about it, but I did not see the video or anything to that regard.
Are you aware of the way each of the victims in this case was killed?
I know they were shot. Now, I don't think it was execution style. I'm assuming this was random.
So, Dr. Romanowski, that's really important. I'm glad you said that. Are you aware the defendant took a gun and strode up to a girl sitting against a locker who had her head covered, put the gun right to her head and executed her? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Do you know what happened to Justin Schilling in the bathroom, the last victim who was killed?
I do not, but I believe there was testimony given regarding one of the other juveniles that was in the bathroom with him.
You heard that testimony.
Just bits of it coming out. I
He
didn't have
ordered him
live
onto the
stream.
ground and he put the gun to the back of his head and he shot him. He executed him. You were not aware of that before.
No,
today.
I was not.
You said there's programming available. That's generally, right? That's not specific to this defendant.
There is no programming that is designed to be specific to any one defendant.
I just want to ask you about a couple of those programs. You're not aware that this defendant needs substance abuse treatment.
No, I was not.
Okay. You mentioned a program that helps with patients. You're not aware that this defendant needs help with patients.
Now, when you say patients, do you mean patients such as a hospital patient or patients as in being patient?
As in being patient.
Yes, there are programs for that.
And are you aware that this defendant doesn't need that? He's got plenty of patients.
I don't know if I am aware he has plenty of patients.
Okay. Are you aware whether he has a problem with impulse control?
I would assume he does have a problem with impulse control.
Okay. You're assuming that.
Yes.
Again, without reference to all of his writings leading up to the crime, of all of his planning, of his getting the gun, and the way in which he killed the victims. So you're saying you think maybe he has a problem with impulse control without knowing the facts.
I'm saying that I would still think he has a problem with impulse control based upon his behavior in the jail.
You referenced, Doctor, that right now there's no good time for defendants. You mentioned that?
Right, correct. Unless you were put into the system prior to 1987.
Okay. And are you aware that, in fact, right now, there are bills pending in the Michigan legislature to restore good time credit? You aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You know, prosecutors generally oppose that, but that's what's being considered right now. So this defendant could be sentenced. These victims could hear his sentence, and next year he could start getting good time credit.
I would think that the law would not be retroactive.
But you would think that, Doctor.
I would think
But
that.
you'd want to read that bill. In your 44 years of corrections, you said you held ultimate responsibility for the supervision of tens of thousands of prisoners, probationers, and parolees. Is that right?
That's correct.
You've pretty much seen it all.
Well, I won't say I've ever seen it all because I've not seen it all.
All right. Of those tens of thousands of people, how many had carried out a mass shooting? And by a mass shooting, I mean a defendant who had killed more than 4 people.
Well, I've had some that were 3 people. I had one that was a family of 5. So there have been a few, but they're far and few and in between, thankfully.
And were any of those terrorists?
No, I don't think any of those were charged with terrorism.
And have you ever advocated for the release of a mass shooter from prison?
4 and more, no.
Okay. And of the juvenile lifers released that you mentioned in Michigan, you talked about the recidivism rate being maybe less than 1%. Were any of those mass shooters?
To my knowledge, they were not. But again, I'm not aware of all the different crimes that were committed. Now, there was one that did receive a reduced sentence. But again, not 4. We're at 3.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Defense redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Romanowski, your expertise in your testimony here today as an expert is based on what happens when a inmate walks through the door of the Department of Corrections, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, you've taken into account the records that you've been provided from the Oakland County Jail, correct?
Correct.
Now, you're not focused when you are reviewing or when you're working as a warden necessarily with how a person got to your facility, correct?
No, I'm not.
Now, you mentioned that some people could be harder to rehabilitate, correct?
That's correct.
But even the hardest person, it's not impossible to rehabilitate them, correct?
I believe that is the case.
Has there been anybody you've come in contact with where it's been impossible to rehabilitate them?
No, but I can't say there's been any magic touch where every person I've seen has been rehabilitated. That's not the case.
So there are people based on your experience that haven't been rehabilitated, correct?
That is correct.
Even though they have the potential, correct?
Yes.
And you've been exposed to inmates that have committed horrific offenses, correct?
Correct.
And even the most horrific of offenses, you still believe that there's the opportunity for rehabilitation, correct?
Yes, I do.
And that's the focus, correct? The opportunity for rehabilitation.
Correct. But again, the individual has to make the choice to take that opportunity, take advantage.
So do you guys think that Ethan could be rehabilitated? Do you think that's even possible with this kid? Let me know. I'm curious.
Of that opportunity.
Now, would you say that somebody that plans something over the course of a few weeks, a few months, still may have impulse control issues?
Right. I mean, that's saying that a person didn't plan or premeditate a crime. What I am saying that yes, there's probably still some impulse control issues there.
And the younger a person is when they commit the crime and become involved in the criminal justice system, does that make it more or less likely that they can be rehabilitated?
I would almost think more likely, and I base that upon the fact that the juveniles that have been released have the lowest recidivism rate of anybody. The state does well at 24%, but 1% is fantastic. So I would say that they have a better chance for rehabilitation, and also these are young offenders. Their minds are still subject to change.
Does your opinion change about Ethan Crumbley's opportunity to be rehabilitated or likelihood of being rehabilitated based on the facts that the prosecutor just shared with you?
Well, I have to say, I find those facts to be horribly disturbing. They are, and there's no question. But do I still think he has the opportunity, the possibility to change? Yes.
Now, the prosecutor also asked you about bills pending to reinstate good time credits, correct?
Yes, I'm not aware of it at all.
Are you aware of bills that are currently pending to prevent sentencing juveniles to life without parole?
No, I'm not. I'm not familiar with that.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, any reason why this witness should not be excused?
No.
There you go.
Thank you. With that being said, doctor, you may step down. You may also leave the courthouse. Please don't discuss your testimony with anyone.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So that's where we're at. We've got 8. So I might do 9 later. We'll play it by ear today. I'm still waiting to find out if anything's happening with Audrey Cunningham. There's a couple updates, but it's not anything. They're just basically talking about what has happened, but nothing new. Nothing new at this point. So if anything budges in that, I'll be back, and that is still my priority is finding out more about her. And I mean, is there a possibility that she is still among us? I can't say no. I mean, anything's a possibility at this point. I'm not thinking it's feeling good right now, but I mean, I'm not going to give up yet. So thank you very much for hanging out for part 8, part 2. Thank you. I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.